All right, welcome on back to the show, guys. We're moving on to our next segment as we're going to be talking a little bit about some early predictions, early MVP candidates that I went ahead and listed when I was doing some research later on or earlier on today. MVP candidates, obviously, last year, Josh Allen from the Bills won it with a fantastic season, and Lamar Jackson was up there as well, and there was a lot of argument that he should have won the MVP based on the numbers. But it ended up going to Josh Allen, and I honestly believe that had a little bit to do with people kind of not necessarily being over seeing Lamar Jackson win MVP. It's just that he had won it the previous year, and he had 2 MVPs already, and Josh Allen is a great quarterback that you feel deserves an MVP, and I feel like that went a long way into determining who the MVP was last year. Whether you think that's fair or not, I believe that that's kind of what happened. For me, some early MVP candidates, obviously, I got to put Josh Allen on there. He's the reigning MVP, and he had a tremendous year last year. You figure they're probably going to be better offensively this year. Not that they were bad last year, but they didn't necessarily have these huge, big-name weapons that you always see, and they don't necessarily have that this year either, but they do have Josh Allen, and that's all that really matters. They got their run game going, too, so last year they did get some run game going, so that will actually, of course, make it a lot easier on Josh Allen and give him more opportunities, most likely, with people being more focused on the run than they used to. And, of course, Josh Allen has that ability to take off with his legs. He's ran for 50-yard touchdowns plenty of times in this league, and he makes these, backyard sort of plays. He always has reminded me of a Ben Roethlisberger, only, of course, Josh Allen is more gifted athletically, in terms of being able to run the ball, because Ben Roethlisberger was never the fastest guy. He could, get away from trouble because of how physical and how tough he was, but, he couldn't, turn on the speed boost or anything like that and really burn you for anything. Josh Allen can do that. Josh Allen has that ability as well as a cannon for an arm, so you definitely have to put Josh Allen up there as one of the candidates for MVP. And Lamar Jackson is the other guy that I have on here. Well, I have several guys, but he's the next guy that I have on this list. Lamar Jackson, 2-time MVP already, arguably could have won it, should have won it last year with his numbers. So he could end up with, way more than 2 or 3 MVPs by the time his career is over if he keeps at this pace, because he has grown an awful lot as a passer. When he first came into the league, he's always been electric running the ball and elusive running the ball and difficult to stop because of that, because he's so good at that. But over the years, he's gotten better and better at throwing the ball and reading defenses and putting it right where it needs to be. Obviously, it's helped that he's gotten better weapons over the years as well, and now he has Derrick Henry, and that takes more pressure off of Lamar Jackson. He can do more things through the air because people are so focused on Derrick Henry and how explosive he is and how he can just completely rip a game wide open with a long run or a vicious stiff arm. Now that puts more attention on Henry, less attention on Lamar Jackson, and Lamar Jackson can beat you both ways. He can beat you through the air and he can beat you on the ground with his legs. He's one of the more elusive quarterbacks, probably the most elusive quarterback and electrifying running quarterback since Michael Vick. I'm a Michael Vick guy in terms of his ability on the field. He was, regardless of what you might think of him off the field, just we're talking about football field stuff. And when he was on the field, Michael Vick was one of the greatest to ever do it. And Lamar Jackson, of course, has that record now that Michael Vick had for a while with the most rushing yards in a single season. I believe Lamar Jackson got that, if I remember correctly. But he's a great, great player and well-deserving of an MVP. And I think he will be right up there in the conversation again next year. And obviously the next guy that I have on this list is Patrick Mahomes. And Patrick Mahomes, he didn't have the greatest statistical year last year, but this is a guy that you never should count out because he is just straight up a winner, and he always has been his whole NFL career. And it would be foolish to disregard him in the MVP conversation because he is one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever do it, not just one of the greatest quarterbacks currently in this league, but you can't count him out. You always got to keep an eye out for Patrick Mahomes. He could, be middling through a game, and then all of a sudden you're half stepping or you fall asleep for a second, and he can beat you with a critical 20-yard run on a third down or something like that, or he gets you with, reading the defense and putting the ball right where it needs to be for a big play, or just getting down the field in 13 seconds and winning the game like he did against Buffalo a couple years ago. So he's a great quarterback, and this is a quarterback award. As much as I would love to give it to a guy like Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry or a defensive player or anything like that, this is a quarterback trophy. It just is, as fair or unfair as that might be. That's just what it's proven over recent years anyway. Not that there hasn't been MVP running backs, because there has been, of course, with Adrian Peterson several years ago, but it's been mainly a quarterback award. You don't ever see receivers or defensive players or anything like that ever winning the award. So this is all a quarterback list, it just is. So the next guy that I have on this list is a guy who is now a Super Bowl champion, and that is Jalen Hurts. And Jalen Hurts, his stats last year, at least throwing the ball, aren't going to knock your socks off or anything like that. But what he's able to do running the ball, and he doesn't run it like Lamar Jackson does. He's more of a physical runner, and he gets a lot of his rushing touchdowns through the brotherly shove that they are now trying to ban, which I think is ridiculous, and I know we talked about that a few days ago on one of our shows. But that is just how effective he is. It's that play that everybody talks about, the brotherly shove, that's skill from Jalen Hurts too. His strength in his legs, being able to push the line and help push the line across, that's a big part of what goes into how successful that play is. Of course, the offensive line and then the push he gets behind them, that definitely helps too. But Jalen Hurts needs to be strong and needs to know how to execute that play as well, and he's very, very good at it. Had an absolutely tremendous game in the Super Bowl against the Chiefs. Had, I believe it was 3 touchdowns running the ball. He had about 2 or 3 touchdowns throwing the ball. He had a crazy stat line, and I'm sure Eagles fans will correct me on that stat line. But yeah, he was fantastic in that Super Bowl, and he really has always been a solid quarterback. Even in his time in Alabama, he was good. Of course, he has been helped by having great coaching for most of his playing career, of course, being at Alabama under Nick Saban, and then, of course, being drafted in Philadelphia. And, say what you want about Nick Sirianni, he's been to 2 Super Bowls, and he coached the best team in the NFL this year, and, he did a great job, so you got to give him credit for that. So Jalen Hurts is on there as one of my MVP candidates. Another guy that I have on this list, last guy I have on the list, is a guy that you could probably make the argument that he should have won the award over Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen last year, and that's Joe Burrow. And the reason why he did not win it last year, I believe, is because he was on the Bengals, and the Bengals missed the playoffs last year because they got into a hole and had to dig themselves out of it and weren't able to get into the playoffs at the end of the day. But it was by no fault of Joe Burrow. He was outstanding, had a crazy stat line. I know we talked about the Bengals in depth before, but Joe Burrow is one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, and I still believe he's the best quarterback in that division, just in terms of just pure quarterback, pure passing quarterback. Lamar Jackson, of course, can hit you both ways, but I think Joe Burrow is the best pure passer in that division by a long shot. And he, would have, who knows what kind of damage they would have made in the playoffs, last year if they were to get in. Their defense struggled, but did improve later on in the year. So by the time the playoffs were rolling around, the defense was actually playing pretty well in terms, if you just compare them to how they were playing early on in the year. I think they played very, very well towards the end of the year, and they could have carried that into the playoffs, and they could have done some real damage. They've beaten the Chiefs in the playoffs before in Arrowhead, so if they were to play the Chiefs last year, who knows, maybe they beat them in that game, and maybe it's a Bills-Bengals AFC Championship game, and who knows what happens there, but I think Joe Burrow absolutely should be considered, and he's going to be a little extra motivated this year because he got his buddies back. Both T. Higgins and Jamar Chase signed big offseason contracts, which is exactly what Joe Burrow wanted to happen. So you're going to have a happy and determined Joe Burrow to try and bounce back from that season that the Bengals had last year. So I would not be surprised if Joe Burrow goes off next year and actually ends up winning MVP. He probably should have won it last year, but like I said, he was on a team that did not play well as a unit collectively throughout the course of the year, and they put themselves in a hole and ended up missing the playoffs. So he deserves mentioning in these MVP candidates. I will also just throw in there Saquon Barkley. If he has another year like he did last year, you got to put him in the conversation for MVP, even though he probably won't win it because he's a running back. And Derrick Henry too is up there as, you know, potential MVP candidate because he was a potential MVP candidate last year as well. But again, it's a quarterback award, so running backs, at least nowadays, are probably not going to get that award. But I definitely wanted to mention both of those guys because they are MVP worthy. All of the guys I mentioned are MVP worthy. So, so that is my MVP candidates that I have. That's basically all quarterbacks with Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Jalen Hurts. Those are the guys that I have listed as my MVP candidates. And, of course, the honorable mentions of Saquon and Derrick Henry as being potential MVP candidates as well if they can continue their success from last season. So that's going to do it for that segment. So when we come back, we've got one more break here. And when we come back, we're going into our final segment. And we're going to dive a little bit into some comments that Deion Sanders made a few days ago in regards to the college football spring game situation. So stick with us. We're going to talk a little bit about that when we come back. All right, so just take this quick break, and we will be right back.